When he pulls away, something ancient activates inside the female psyche, something far older than the relationship itself, something that does not belong to him personally but uses his absence as a trigger, and this is why the reaction feels so immediate and so overwhelming, because what is being touched is not logic but memory, not reason but nervous system imprint. And Jung understood this deeply when he spoke about complexes, because a complex does not respond to the present moment, it responds to the past that never fully resolved itself. When a man pulls away, the mind immediately looks for strategy, for explanation, for the right action that will restore closeness, but the body is already ahead, bracing, tightening, preparing for loss, and this is where chasing begins, not as a conscious choice but as a reflex. Chasing is often misunderstood as lack of self-respect, but psychologically it is an attempt to restore internal balance when uncertainty threatens emotional safety, and for many women, emotional safety was never guaranteed early in life, it had to be maintained, earned, protected, or negotiated. So when distance appears, the psyche does not interpret it neutrally, it interprets it as danger, and danger demands action. Jung would say that at this moment the woman is no longer responding to the man, she is responding to the archetype he has activated, the archetype of absence, of withdrawal, of conditional love, and once an archetype is activated, reason loses authority. This is why advice like, just don't care, or just be confident, never works, because you cannot think your way out of a nervous system reaction. When he pulls away, the urge to text, to explain, to clarify, to soften, to check in, to re-establish connection feels urgent because silence feels like erasure, and the unconscious equates erasure with annihilation, especially if love once felt unpredictable. Chasing then becomes a way to reassert existence, to say, I am here, I matter, don't forget me, even if these words are never spoken aloud. Jung warned that whenever our sense of self depends on the response of another, we are no longer in relationship, we are in projection, because the other person is now carrying something of our identity for us. This is why pulling away feels so destabilizing, because it feels as if something essential has been taken, when in reality it was temporarily outsourced. The crucial shift begins when a woman realizes that chasing does not actually bring safety, it brings temporary relief at the cost of long-term self-trust, because every time you chase, you teach your psyche that your stability depends on external reassurance. This is not a moral failure, it is a learned pattern, and patterns persist until they are made conscious. Jung believed that consciousness does not eliminate pain immediately, but it changes the meaning of pain, and meaning determines behavior. When a woman begins to understand that the anxiety she feels when he pulls away is not proof that something is wrong, but proof that something old is being activated, she creates a pause inside herself, and this pause is not silence as punishment, it is silence as containment. Containment is one of the most important psychological capacities a woman can develop, because it allows her to feel without acting, to experience emotion without becoming it, and to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into self-erasure. When he pulls away and she does not chase, something radical happens internally first, long before anything happens externally. The nervous system is forced to find regulation from within rather than from him. This feels uncomfortable at first, sometimes unbearable, because the body was trained to calm itself through connection, through response, through reassurance, but as Jung emphasized, maturity begins when the psyche can hold tension without immediately discharging it. This holding is not passive, it is deeply active, because it requires presence, awareness, and restraint. As the woman stays with her discomfort instead of escaping it through pursuit, she begins to notice that the intensity of the urge rises and falls like a wave, and this is the moment of empowerment that is rarely talked about, because it is quiet, not dramatic. She realizes she can survive the feeling of being unchosen without chasing proof that she is chosen, and this realization changes her internal hierarchy. No longer is the man the regulator of her emotional state, she is. Externally, this stillness has consequences. When a woman stops chasing, the dynamic loses its unconscious support, because distance only holds power when someone else rushes to close it. If he is capable of emotional presence, the space will not frighten him, it will clarify him. He will either step forward with intention or reveal his limitations without ambiguity. Jung would say that reality reveals itself when projection withdraws, and chasing is projection in motion. It keeps the illusion alive that effort can replace reciprocity. When the illusion collapses, truth appears, and truth is not always what the ego hoped for, but it is always what the psyche needs. Many women fear that if they do not chase, they will lose him, but the deeper truth is that if not chasing causes him to disappear, then presence was never mutual, it was being maintained through imbalance. This insight can feel devastating, because it forces grief, not only for the person but for the fantasy of who you thought he could be, and Jung taught that grief is the gateway to integration, because it is where illusion dies and reality is accepted. What replaces chasing is not coldness, it is discernment. The woman begins to observe rather than react, to notice patterns rather than moments, to feel into whether the connection expands her or contracts her. This observational stance is not defensive, it is conscious, and consciousness is what dissolves compulsive repetition. Over time, the urge to chase weakens, not because she becomes indifferent, but because she becomes anchored. She no longer needs to act to prove her value, because value is no longer up for negotiation. When he pulls away now, she does not ask, "What should I do so he stays?" She asks, "What does this dynamic require me to ignore about myself?" And this question changes everything, because it returns authority inward. Jung believed that the individuation process for women often involves reclaiming psychic energy that was given away in relationships, and this reclaiming does not happen through confrontation, it happens through withdrawal of unconscious investment. When she stops chasing, she is not withdrawing love, she is withdrawing self-abandonment, and this is why the shift feels so profound. She remains open, but no longer overextended, interested but no longer anxious, receptive but no longer responsible for someone else's emotional availability. And in this space, whether he returns or not becomes secondary to something far more important. She has not left herself. When a woman continues without chasing, something else begins to surface that is often more confronting than the fear of losing him, and that is the realization of how much emotional effort she has normalized over time, how much inner movement she performed just to keep connection alive, and how little of that effort was ever truly mirrored. This awareness does not arrive as a single thought, but as a gradual loosening, as if the psyche finally has room to stretch after being held in a contracted position for years. Jung spoke about this as the withdrawal of libido from an external object back into the self, and when this happens, there is often a strange mix of relief and sadness, because energy that was once invested in monitoring, anticipating, and adjusting is suddenly available, and the woman does not yet know what to do with it. This is why the period after not chasing can feel empty, even lonely, because the nervous system is no longer busy, and busyness once disguised pain. When he pulls away and she does not pursue, the silence forces her to encounter herself without distraction, and this encounter can feel unsettling because it reveals how much of her emotional life revolved around reaction rather than choice. Jung believed that consciousness often feels like loss before it feels like freedom, because identity structures collapse before new ones are formed. The woman may begin to notice that her thoughts slow down, that she is no longer replaying conversations as intensely, that the urge to check her phone weakens, not because she has become indifferent, but because her psyche is no longer in a state of emergency. This shift is subtle but decisive. Instead of scanning for signs of reassurance, she begins to feel into her own internal state, and this is a skill many women were never taught, because attention was always directed outward, toward harmony, toward connection, toward emotional attunement with others. Now attention turns inward, and with it comes discernment. She begins to recognize the difference between missing someone and missing the feeling of being wanted, between desire and anxiety, between intimacy and familiarity. Jung emphasized that familiarity often masquerades as love, especially when the familiar includes tension, unpredictability, and emotional withholding. When he pulls away and she does not chase, the familiar pattern is interrupted, and interruption allows differentiation. She can now ask herself whether she actually felt secure with him before the distance, or whether security was something she was constantly trying to create. This question is not asked intellectually but somatically, through sensation, through how her body responds when she imagines re-entering the dynamic. Often there is a tightening, a heaviness, a subtle resistance that was previously ignored because desire overruled perception. By not chasing, she gives these signals space to speak. Externally, this inner shift often changes how the man experiences the dynamic, but not in the way popular advice suggests. It is not about triggering pursuit or creating mystery, it is about removing compensation. When a woman stops compensating for emotional distance, the dynamic is forced into honesty. Either the man steps forward from his own capacity, or the distance becomes permanent, and both outcomes provide clarity. Jung believed that clarity is the antidote to neurosis, because neurosis thrives on ambiguity. Chasing prolongs ambiguity by keeping hope alive without evidence. Stillness collapses ambiguity by letting behavior stand on its own. For the woman, this means that she no longer has to interpret mixed signals or decode silence, because silence itself becomes information. If he reaches out with presence, effort, and consistency, she can meet him without resentment because she did not abandon herself in the waiting. If he does not, she experiences disappointment, but not disintegration. This distinction is crucial. Disappointment hurts, but it does not fracture identity. Disintegration occurs when self-worth was staked on outcome. By not chasing, she removes her self-worth from the negotiation table. Over time, this practice reshapes her attachment patterns. She becomes less reactive to withdrawal, less hooked by inconsistency, less willing to overinvest early. Jung would say that the complex loses energy when it is no longer fed, and chasing is the primary way the abandonment complex is fed. Without that fuel, the complex weakens. She may still feel longing, but longing no longer dictates behavior. She may still desire closeness, but closeness is no longer pursued at the expense of dignity. This internal realignment changes how she enters future relationships as well. She no longer sees distance as a challenge to overcome, but as a signal to assess. She no longer equates effort with love, or endurance with depth. Love becomes something simpler, quieter, more mutual. When he pulls away now, whether in this relationship or another, her first response is not urgency but curiosity, not fear but awareness. She notices what arises in her body, she names it without acting it out, and she allows the dynamic to reveal itself without interference. This does not make her passive, it makes her sovereign. Jung believed that sovereignty of the psyche is the foundation of healthy relationship, because only two sovereign individuals can truly meet. Anything else is compensation, rescue, or reenactment. By not chasing, the woman is not withholding love, she is preserving truth, and truth, once allowed to speak, reorganizes everything that comes after. As this process continues, the woman begins to notice a deeper shift that has nothing to do with a man and everything to do with her internal orientation toward relationship itself, because when chasing stops, the psyche no longer organizes itself around anticipation, and anticipation was once the axis of emotional life. Jung believed that anticipation keeps the psyche suspended between past and future, rarely inhabiting the present, and many women live for years in this suspended state, waiting for clarity, for reassurance, for a signal that would finally allow them to relax. When he pulls away and she does not chase, the future loosens its grip, and with it, the fantasy of resolution. This is unsettling at first because fantasy provided momentum, but without it, the present moment expands, and the woman is forced to encounter what is actually here rather than what could be. She may realize that the relationship, even before the withdrawal, required constant vigilance, that she was monitoring tone, timing, emotional availability, and that this monitoring was exhausting even when things seemed good. Jung would say that the psyche cannot heal in a state of vigilance, because vigilance is a survival response, not a relational one. By not chasing, she steps out of survival mode and into observation, and observation reveals cost. She begins to feel the accumulated fatigue of always being the one who bridged gaps, softened edges, and maintained emotional continuity. This fatigue does not arrive as anger but as clarity, a quiet recognition that something has been uneven for a long time. As she sits with this recognition, another fear may arise, one that is rarely named, the fear that without chasing, without effort, without emotional labor, there may be very little left. This fear is not pessimism, it is realism emerging, and realism can feel brutal when it replaces hope. Jung emphasized that hope becomes pathological when it denies reality, and chasing often sustains hope long after reality has spoken. When the woman allows reality to speak, she may feel grief not only for the relationship but for the version of herself who believed love required endurance. This grief is important, because it marks the end of a cycle. Without chasing, she is no longer rehearsing the role of the one who waits, and this changes how she experiences time. Days feel less charged, nights less restless, not because desire has disappeared, but because her nervous system is no longer being pulled forward by uncertainty. She begins to sleep differently, think differently, inhabit her body more fully. Jung would describe this as a return of libido to the self, and when this happens, creativity, curiosity, and inner life begin to reawaken. She may find herself drawn to things that have nothing to do with relationships, not as avoidance but as rebalancing. This rebalancing is crucial, because it rebuilds an identity that is not dependent on romantic validation. Externally, if the man returns during this phase, the interaction feels different. She is not flooded with relief, she is not eager to resume where things left off. Instead, she notices whether his return includes accountability, clarity, and sustained effort. She listens more than she explains. If his return lacks substance, She feels disappointment but not urgency, because urgency belonged to the old pattern. If he does not return at all, the pain is real, but it moves through her rather than consuming her, because she did not keep the wound open through pursuit. Jung believed that pain integrates when it is experienced fully without distortion, and chasing distorts pain by converting it into action. By staying still, she allows the pain to complete its cycle. Over time, she realizes that not chasing did not make her colder, it made her truer. She did not become detached, she became self-attached. This self-attachment changes how she perceives future withdrawal as well. When someone pulls away now, her system does not immediately interpret it as danger. She assesses context, pattern, and impact. She communicates if necessary, but she does not overfunction. She allows space without fear, because space no longer threatens her existence. Jung would say that this is the moment when relationship stops being a place of compensation and becomes a place of meeting. And whether the relationship survives or ends, she remains intact, because her sense of self is no longer organized around pursuit. In this way, not chasing becomes more than a response to a single situation, it becomes a psychological stance, one that says, without words, that connection must be mutual to be meaningful, and that love cannot be sustained by effort alone. This stance does not guarantee outcomes, but it guarantees integrity, and integrity, once established, quietly governs every relationship that follows. As the woman remains in this stance, another layer of understanding begins to emerge, one that touches not only her romantic history but her entire relational blueprint, because the impulse to chase was never isolated to one man, it was a strategy learned early to preserve connection when connection felt fragile. Jung believed that the psyche repeats what it has not yet understood, and many women unknowingly repeat the role of the one who holds things together, not because they enjoy it, but because it once worked. It once kept love close. It once reduced chaos. It once prevented abandonment, or at least softened it. When he pulls away and she does not chase, she is not just responding differently in the present, she is interrupting a lifelong pattern of over-responsibility. This interruption can feel destabilizing because it removes a familiar sense of purpose. Chasing gave her something to do, something to fix, something to focus on. Without it, there is a void, and the void asks a new question. Who am I when I am not managing connection? Jung emphasized that identity built around function collapses when the function is no longer needed, and this collapse can feel like disorientation. The woman may notice moments of restlessness, a sense of not knowing where to place her emotional energy, because for so long that energy flowed outward. This is not regression, it is reorientation. Her psyche is learning to hold energy within, to circulate it internally rather than exporting it in the hope of return. This internal circulation creates a new kind of stability, one that does not depend on response time, tone, or reassurance. As this stability grows, she becomes more sensitive to the quality of interactions rather than their intensity. She notices how certain exchanges feel calming while others feel activating, how some conversations leave her grounded while others leave her spiraling. Jung would say that the unconscious communicates through affect, and affect does not lie. By not chasing, she has space to listen. She begins to recognize that what she once interpreted as chemistry was often nervous system activation, and what she dismissed as boring was often safety. This realization changes her attraction patterns slowly but decisively. She is less drawn to unpredictability, less impressed by emotional highs, less willing to tolerate ambiguity. This does not mean she stops desiring passion, but passion is no longer allowed to override coherence. When he pulls away now, she does not rush to reinterpret the past to preserve hope. She allows the present to inform her understanding. If the pattern of withdrawal is consistent, she does not excuse it with potential. She understands that potential is not a relationship, it is a projection. Jung warned that projection binds us to people not as they are, but as carriers of our unmet needs. When projection withdraws, disappointment often follows, but disappointment is cleaner than self-betrayal. The woman begins to value clean endings over prolonged confusion. She no longer needs dramatic closure conversations because she trusts her perception. Silence, inconsistency, and avoidance communicate clearly enough. This trust in perception is one of the most important outcomes of not chasing, because it restores epistemic authority. She no longer doubts what she sees in favor of what she hopes. As this authority strengthens, her communication changes as well. She speaks more simply, asks fewer questions designed to elicit reassurance, and tolerates unanswered messages without catastrophizing. Not because she is indifferent, but because her sense of self is no longer at stake in the response. Jung believed that when the ego aligns with the self, behavior becomes simpler, less reactive, more proportional. This proportionality is felt by others. Some men respond to it with increased respect and clarity, others withdraw completely because the dynamic no longer feeds their avoidance. Both responses are information. The woman does not personalize them. She understands that her job is not to be chosen by everyone, but to choose well. Over time, she realizes that not chasing did not make her lose love, it filtered it. What remains are connections that do not require pursuit to survive. And even when she is alone, the aloneness feels different. It is not charged with waiting, it is not heavy with anticipation. It is simply space. Jung wrote that solitude is the laboratory of the psyche, the place where integration completes itself. In this space, the woman feels more real, more grounded, less fragmented. She is no longer divided between who she is and who she needs to be to keep someone close. This internal unity becomes her baseline. So when he pulls away, whether now or in the future, she does not see it as a test of her worth or her effort. She sees it as a moment of truth. And truth, once recognized, no longer requires chasing. As this orientation settles, the woman begins to experience a quieter but more radical form of power, one that does not announce itself and does not seek confirmation, because it is rooted in internal coherence rather than external response. Jung believed that true psychological power emerges when the ego no longer negotiates with fear, and fear was always the hidden driver behind chasing. When he pulled away, fear whispered that something must be done immediately or something precious would be lost forever. Now, as the woman remains grounded in her own center, fear still appears, but it no longer dictates movement. It becomes information rather than instruction. This distinction reshapes how she relates not only to him, but to uncertainty itself. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat that must be resolved. It becomes a condition that can be tolerated. Tolerance here does not mean resignation, it means capacity. The capacity to remain present without forcing outcome. The capacity to feel longing without turning it into pursuit. The capacity to allow another person to reveal themselves over time without rushing the reveal. Jung emphasized that time is an ally of truth, and chasing collapses time, demanding answers before reality has had the chance to show its shape. By not chasing, the woman gives time back its function. She notices that when she allows space, patterns become obvious. Withdrawal is no longer a singular event but a rhythm. Presence is no longer a promise but a practice. She stops evaluating the relationship by moments of intensity and starts evaluating it by continuity. This shift is crucial, because intensity can be manufactured, but continuity cannot. Continuity requires capacity, intention, and emotional availability sustained over time. When he pulls away and she does not chase, she removes the pressure that once masked these qualities. Without pressure, what remains is what is real. This reality can be sobering. She may see that his pullback is not circumstantial but characteristic, not temporary but patterned. Or she may see that his pullback was a response to stress and that he returns with accountability and steadiness. Either way, the truth emerges cleanly. Jung believed that the psyche seeks truth even when the ego prefers comfort, and this is why the not-chasing stance ultimately feels right even when it feels painful. Pain that comes from seeing clearly has a different texture than pain that comes from confusion. It is sharper but shorter, more honest, less corrosive. As she lives from this place, her self-concept begins to reorganize. She no longer sees herself as someone who must work to be loved. She sees herself as someone who chooses where to invest her emotional energy. This is not arrogance, it is realism. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Love is finite. And giving these endlessly to someone who cannot reciprocate is not devotion, it is depletion. Jung wrote that neurosis is often the result of a life lived against one's own nature, and for many women, chasing was a life lived against their own need for reciprocity. When she stops, her system relaxes into something more natural. She becomes less vigilant, less preoccupied, more present in her own life. Her friendships deepen. Her interests re-emerge. Her inner world grows richer. This richness reduces the emotional stakes of any single relationship, which paradoxically allows her to show up more authentically. She is no longer performing availability or withholding to protect herself. She is simply responding from truth. If he reaches out, she responds if she wants to, not because she is afraid of losing momentum. If he does not, she notices the disappointment without turning it into self-criticism. She understands that disappointment is a normal response to misalignment, not evidence of personal failure. Jung emphasized that suffering becomes neurotic when it is personalized unnecessarily. By not chasing, she depersonalizes withdrawal. She no longer interprets it as a verdict on her worth, but as a reflection of the other person's capacity or circumstance. This depersonalization is not emotional distancing, it is psychological accuracy. It allows compassion without self-sacrifice. Over time, this accuracy becomes intuitive. She no longer has to remind herself not to chase. The impulse fades because the belief that once fueled it has dissolved. She no longer believes that closeness must be secured through effort, or that absence must be corrected through pursuit. She trusts that what is meant to stay will stay without being chased, and what requires chasing is not aligned with the kind of love she is now capable of sustaining. This trust is not naive. It is earned through experience, through staying present with discomfort, through choosing integrity over reassurance again and again. Jung believed that individuation is marked by simplicity, by fewer inner arguments, by less inner division. The woman feels this simplicity as a quiet confidence. She does not announce boundaries, her behavior expresses them. She does not threaten to leave, she simply does not stay where she must abandon herself. When he pulls away now, the moment is no longer charged with urgency. It is met with awareness. And awareness, once established, changes the trajectory of every relationship that follows, because it replaces chasing with choice, fear with discernment, and longing with self-respect that does not need to be defended. As this way of relating becomes more embodied, the woman starts to recognize how deeply the urge to chase was tied to her relationship with uncertainty, not only in love but in life. Jung believed that the psyche seeks certainty as a defense against anxiety, and when certainty is unavailable, it often substitutes control. Chasing was a form of control disguised as care, an attempt to stabilize what felt unstable by inserting effort where clarity was missing. When she no longer does this, uncertainty remains, but it is no longer catastrophic. It becomes something she can hold without immediately trying to resolve it. This capacity transforms her inner landscape. She notices that many of her previous fears were amplified not by events themselves, but by the urgency with which she tried to prevent them. Without that urgency, fear loses momentum. It still arises, but it passes more quickly, because it is no longer being reinforced by action. Jung emphasized that what we resist persists, but what we observe dissolves, and by not chasing, the woman is no longer resisting uncertainty, she is observing it. This observation reveals that uncertainty does not actually destroy her, it simply activates sensations she was taught to avoid. As she stays with these sensations, she becomes more fluent in her own emotional language. She can distinguish between intuition and anxiety, between a genuine desire to connect and a compulsive need to secure. This distinction is subtle but crucial, because intuition is calm even when it warns, while anxiety is urgent even when it reassures. When he pulls away and she does not chase, intuition has room to speak. She may sense that something is misaligned without needing proof. She may feel that waiting is not wrong but unnecessary. She may realize that her longing is less about him and more about the comfort of familiarity. Jung warned that the familiar can be more seductive than the healthy, because it feels known, even when it hurts. By not chasing, she breaks the spell of familiarity. She no longer confuses emotional activation with emotional truth. This reorientation changes how she perceives attraction. She is less magnetized by distance, less intrigued by inconsistency, because these no longer activate hope, they activate discernment. Hope now attaches to qualities that are steady, responsive, and emotionally available. This does not mean she becomes rigid or closed. On the contrary, she becomes more open because openness is no longer risky. When you are not chasing, you are not overinvested, and when you are not overinvested, you can be present without fear. Presence becomes her default state rather than vigilance. Jung would say that the ego has stopped being hijacked by the complex, and this allows the self to guide behavior more naturally. In practical terms, this means she no longer rushes to fill silence with words, or distance with explanations. She allows conversations to unfold at their own pace. She responds rather than initiates when something feels uncertain. She notices whether effort is mutual rather than assuming it should be. This does not make her passive, it makes her accurate. Accuracy is a form of respect, both for herself and for the other person. It respects the truth of what is happening instead of trying to overwrite it with intention. Over time, this accuracy creates a sense of inner congruence. Her thoughts, feelings, and actions begin to align. She no longer says she wants closeness while tolerating distance. She no longer says she values consistency while accepting ambiguity. Her values become lived rather than stated. Jung believed that when values are embodied, life simplifies, because fewer decisions need to be made consciously. Behavior flows from inner order. When he pulls away now, the response is not calculated, it is organic. She does not ask herself what she should do, she knows what she will not do. She will not chase. She will not explain away discomfort. She will not override her own perception to preserve hope. This clarity feels grounding. It creates a sense of self-respect that is not performative or brittle. It does not depend on winning or losing the relationship. It exists independently of outcome. This independence does not eliminate desire. She still wants connection, intimacy, love. But desire no longer controls her behavior. It informs it. Jung emphasized that freedom is not the absence of desire, but the absence of compulsion, and by not chasing, the woman moves from compulsion to choice. This movement affects how others experience her. Some may feel unsettled because they can no longer rely on her to stabilize their uncertainty. Others may feel drawn to her calm, her groundedness, her lack of demand. She does not manage their emotions for them. She does not chase their attention. She allows them to show up as they are. This allowance is not indifference, it is respect. And respect, once introduced into a dynamic, changes its entire structure. If the relationship continues, it does so on more equal ground. If it ends, it does so with less chaos and less self-blame. In either case, the woman remains intact. She does not lose herself in the process, because she is no longer chasing something outside herself to feel whole. She carries her wholeness with her. This is the deeper outcome of not chasing when he pulls away. It is not about changing his behavior. It is about changing her relationship to herself, to uncertainty, and to love. And once that relationship changes, every external relationship reorganizes around it, quietly, inevitably, without force. When this inner shift consolidates, everything starts moving faster internally, even if externally it looks calm. The urgency that once drove her to act now becomes information instead of command. Jung would say the energy of the complex has been withdrawn, and that energy returns to the psyche as vitality. She feels clearer, sharper, less foggy. Decisions that once took hours of overthinking now resolve themselves quietly. If he pulls away again, the body no longer tightens the same way. There is a pause instead of panic. In that pause, truth appears. She notices whether she actually misses him or misses the version of herself that felt chosen. This distinction matters. Many women chase not the man, but the feeling of being desired, because desire temporarily soothes deeper insecurities about worth. When she stops chasing, those insecurities surface, but instead of collapsing her, they strengthen her. She learns she can feel unwanted without becoming unworthy. This is a radical reprogramming. Jung believed that maturity comes when the ego can withstand negative effect without disintegrating. This is exactly what happens here. The woman builds emotional muscle. She no longer equates distance with danger. Distance becomes data. It tells her how available the other person truly is. She stops filling gaps with fantasy. Fantasy was never neutral. It was a defense. By removing it, reality becomes clearer, and clarity reduces suffering even when the outcome is disappointing. She also notices how much energy she now has. Chasing was exhausting. Monitoring texts, replaying conversations, strategizing timing, all of that consumed psychic energy. Without it, she feels more present in her own life. Her focus returns to her body, her work, her friendships, her creativity. Jung emphasized that libido is not only sexual energy but life energy. When it is no longer trapped in relational anxiety, it flows back into the individual. This makes her more alive, more attractive, not because she is trying to be, but because she is inhabiting herself fully. If he senses this and returns, the dynamic is different. She does not rush to reattach. She observes consistency over time. She allows trust to rebuild slowly. She does not reward disappearance with instant access. This is not punishment. It is alignment. And if he does not return, the loss feels cleaner. There is grief, but not confusion. Grief moves. Confusion lingers. By not chasing, she chooses grief over confusion, and grief heals faster. Jung would say that what is conscious can be mourned, but what is unconscious keeps repeating. She has stepped out of repetition. This is the real victory. Not keeping him, not proving anything, but ending a cycle that no longer matched who she is becoming. From this place, future relationships start differently. She no longer bonds through anxiety. She bonds through presence. She notices red flags earlier because she is not invested in overriding them. She trusts her timing. She trusts silence. She trusts herself. And this trust becomes the new foundation. When someone pulls away now, it no longer triggers pursuit. It triggers evaluation. Does this connection nourish or deplete? Does it expand or contract her? The answers come quickly. She acts accordingly. Quietly. Decisively. Without drama. Without chasing. As this new pattern settles, something even deeper begins to reorganize. The woman starts to recognize how early this chasing reflex was formed. Long before this man, long before this relationship, her nervous system learned that love required effort, vigilance, and emotional labor. Jung would call this a mother or father complex, not as blame, but as structure. The psyche repeats what it learned in order to master it. When he pulls away, the old script activates, urging her to restore closeness at any cost. But now, with awareness, the script loses authority. She sees it as history, not destiny. This recognition alone loosens its grip. She stops interpreting distance as a verdict on her value. Instead, she asks a different question: what part of me feels endangered right now? And she listens. Often the answer is younger than the present moment. It is a part that learned to survive by adapting, by overgiving, by staying emotionally alert. When she turns toward this part instead of abandoning it for external reassurance, something repairs internally. She becomes the stable presence she once searched for in others. Jung believed that healing occurs when the ego forms a conscious relationship with the unconscious content rather than being possessed by it. This is exactly what happens here. The anxiety no longer runs the system. It is held, felt, understood. And because it is held, it does not have to shout. The urge to chase fades not because she is suppressing it, but because it is no longer needed. She is no longer trying to secure love through movement. She allows love to reveal itself through behavior over time. This makes her more discerning. She notices patterns quickly. Inconsistency no longer feels mysterious or seductive. It feels draining. And she trusts that signal. Jung wrote that what drains energy is not aligned with the self. The body knows before the mind explains. By staying still when he pulls away, she gives the truth space to emerge. Either he returns with clarity and accountability, or he fades and confirms what was already present. Both outcomes bring resolution. Resolution is power. She no longer negotiates with uncertainty. She does not send messages to restore equilibrium. She lets equilibrium come from within. This changes how others experience her. She is calmer, less reactive, more grounded. People sense this, not as coldness, but as self-possession. She is no longer chasing connection. She is choosing alignment. And this choice reshapes her relational future. She begins to attract partners who meet her pace, who communicate directly, who do not disappear to regulate themselves. This is not coincidence. It is resonance. The psyche organizes the outer world around the inner order. When she stops chasing, she stops participating in dynamics that require her to shrink, wait, or overfunction. She becomes unavailable to half-presence. And that unavailability is not a defense. It is a boundary born of clarity. Jung would say this is individuation in motion. She is no longer defining herself through attachment alone. She is relating as a whole person. From this place, Love is no longer something to secure. It is something to recognize when it arrives. From this grounded place, her perception sharpens. She begins to notice how often she once confused intensity with intimacy, urgency with importance, distance with depth. When he pulled away before, it activated imagination. Silence became a canvas where fear painted stories. Now silence is simply information. Jung believed that projection thrives in the absence of consciousness. When awareness enters, projection collapses. She stops filling the gaps with fantasy. She observes what is actually happening. He pulls away. There is no pursuit, no explanation demanded, no emotional negotiation, just observation. And in that observation, the truth reveals itself without resistance. Either he moves toward connection with consistency, or he remains unavailable. Both outcomes are honest. Honesty brings peace. She no longer tries to extract certainty from someone who is unsure. She lets uncertainty stand on its own. This is not indifference. It is respect for reality. The psyche relaxes when it is no longer forced to maintain illusions. Her energy returns to her body. She sleeps differently. Breath deepens. Appetite stabilizes. Jung emphasized that psychic conflict always manifests somatically. When the inner conflict resolves, the body follows. She feels herself coming back online. Not euphoric, not dramatic, just present. And presence is magnetic, not because it tries to be, but because it is whole. She begins to experience desire without anxiety attached. She wants connection, but she does not need it to regulate her worth. This distinction changes everything. She can enjoy affection without clinging. She can miss someone without losing herself. When he does reach out, she does not rush to re-establish closeness. She listens to tone, to effort, to consistency. She allows time to be the revealer. Jung wrote that time is the medium through which truth unfolds. Rushing distorts perception. Waiting clarifies. By staying still, she allows the relationship to show its natural rhythm. If it requires pursuit to survive, it was never mutual. This realization is sobering, but freeing. She stops romanticizing potential. She relates to what is. This brings grief. Grief for what she hoped, for what she imagined, for what she invested. But grief is honest pain, not anxiety. Anxiety tries to prevent loss. Grief accepts it. Acceptance restores dignity. She allows herself to feel the sadness without turning it into self-blame. Jung saw grief as a gateway to transformation. When fully felt, it clears space for new orientation. She does not replace him immediately. She does not distract herself with attention. She sits with the emptiness long enough for it to teach her something. And what it teaches her is this: she survived every distance before. She does not disappear when someone withdraws. She remains. This knowing changes her posture toward love forever. She no longer scans for signs of abandonment. She scans for alignment. Her standards rise quietly, not from fear, but from self-trust. She becomes less available to emotional confusion, less tolerant of inconsistency, less willing to abandon herself for connection. Jung believed that the psyche moves toward wholeness when the ego stops bargaining with what diminishes it. She no longer bargains. She chooses clarity over hope when hope demands self-erasure. And because of this, the relationships that enter her life now feel different. Calmer, slower, more mutual. She is no longer chasing. She is meeting. And that changes the entire equation. As this way of being deepens, she begins to understand that not chasing is not a strategy to get him back, but a return to herself. This distinction matters. When non-chasing is used as manipulation, the nervous system stays activated, waiting, watching, counting time. But when it comes from self-reconnection, there is no countdown. There is no performance. There is only presence. Jung warned that the unconscious can turn even healthy behaviors into compulsions if the motive remains unconscious. So she watches her own motives gently. She notices when stillness feels grounded and when it feels like restraint. When silence feels peaceful and when it feels tense. This self-observation is not judgment. It is curiosity. Curiosity dissolves shame. And shame was always one of the hidden engines behind chasing. The belief that if she were just a little more loving, a little more patient, a little more understanding, she could prevent abandonment. That belief quietly dissolves now. She sees that love does not need convincing. It responds freely or it does not. And if it does not, no amount of pursuit can transform absence into presence. Jung described this as withdrawing projections. She stops projecting her longing onto someone else's potential. She retrieves it. The longing returns to her as vitality, creativity, desire for life. She begins to feel a subtle excitement not about him, but about herself. About the parts of her that were neglected while she was monitoring someone else's availability. She starts doing small things without announcing them. Taking care of her body. Rearranging her space. Saying no without explanation. These acts seem ordinary, but psychologically they are profound. They signal to the unconscious that she is no longer orienting her life around external approval. The psyche listens to actions more than affirmations. As this new signal stabilizes, her inner dialogue softens. The frantic questions fade. Why did he pull away? What did I do wrong? What should I say? In their place appears a quieter inquiry. Does this feel good for me? Does this align with how I want to feel in connection? Jung believed that the self communicates through feeling tones. When something repeatedly produces anxiety, contraction, self-doubt, it is information. She honors that information now. She no longer overrides it with hope. When memories of him surface, they do not hijack her day. They pass through. She lets them. Resistance would only strengthen them. Allowing them to come and go teaches her nervous system that longing is survivable. That separation is not annihilation. This is crucial. Many women chase not because they lack strength, but because their system associates distance with danger. When that association loosens, choice becomes possible. She can choose to respond or not, to engage or not. And choice is the birthplace of dignity. If he returns inconsistently, she feels the pull, but she does not surrender to it. She notices the familiar chemistry, the emotional gravity. Jung would call this an archetypal pull, not personal, but patterned. Awareness does not erase attraction, but it contextualizes it. She does not mistake intensity for destiny anymore. She lets behavior speak louder than emotion. And this takes patience. Patience with herself. With the part that still hopes. With the part that still remembers. She does not shame these parts. She integrates them. Integration is slower than suppression, but it lasts. Over time, something subtle but decisive happens. The image of him loses its charge. Not because she forces indifference, but because her life becomes fuller elsewhere. Meaning redistributes. Energy that was once tied up in monitoring his distance now flows into friendships, creativity, solitude, ambition. Jung believed libido was not merely sexual energy, but life energy. Where it flows determines experience. Her libido returns to her. She feels more alive, more embodied, more sovereign. If he reaches out from a place of confusion, she can feel compassion without attachment. If he reaches out with clarity, she can assess without urgency. Either way, she is no longer trying to be chosen. She is choosing. And this is the quiet power of not chasing. It does not guarantee reunion. It guarantees self-respect. And from a Jungian perspective, self-respect is alignment with the self. When that alignment is present, relationships become expressions of wholeness, not attempts to complete what was never missing. As this alignment with herself becomes more stable, the woman begins to experience a profound recalibration of how she understands love itself. Love is no longer something that arrives suddenly and must be held onto tightly before it disappears. It becomes something that unfolds slowly, something that reveals itself through consistency, care, and emotional availability over time. Jung believed that immature love seeks fusion to escape loneliness, while mature love seeks connection without loss of self. By not chasing, the woman steps out of fusion-seeking and into relatedness. This transition is subtle but life-altering. She no longer feels compelled to merge emotionally in order to feel secure. She can be close without collapsing her boundaries. When he pulls away, She does not experience it as an existential threat. It may still hurt, but it does not destabilize her identity. She understands now that another person's withdrawal is not proof of her insufficiency, but evidence of their inner world, their capacity, their fears, or their limitations. This understanding brings compassion, but it also brings limits. Compassion no longer means endurance. Empathy no longer means self-sacrifice. Jung emphasized that consciousness differentiates, and differentiation is what allows love to exist without possession. As she lives from this place, her emotional reactions become proportionate. She no longer oscillates between hope and despair. She responds to what is happening, not to what she fears might happen. This proportionality gives her nervous system a sense of safety that chasing never provided. Safety no longer depends on response time or reassurance. It comes from self-trust. She trusts that she can handle disappointment. She trusts that she can survive loss. She trusts that she does not need to chase to be worthy of love. This trust changes how she shows up in conversations. She is more honest. She asks direct questions when appropriate, not to secure attachment, but to clarify alignment. And she accepts the answers without trying to reshape them. Jung believed that neurosis arises when we refuse to accept what is true. By accepting truth, even when it is painful, she frees herself from unnecessary suffering. If he says he is unsure, she hears uncertainty. If he says he needs space, she does not interpret it as a challenge to prove her value. She hears a boundary. She respects it without disappearing herself. This balance is new. It feels steady. She no longer bends herself to maintain connection. She allows connection to exist only where it can breathe. Over time, this creates a deep sense of internal calm. Her mind is quieter. Her emotional swings are less extreme. She feels more grounded in her body. Jung would say the psyche has found a more stable center of gravity. From this center, attraction changes. She is no longer drawn to people who keep her guessing. She is drawn to those who are emotionally transparent, who communicate clearly, who do not disappear to regulate themselves. This is not because she has hardened, but because her system no longer confuses anxiety with excitement. She has learned the felt difference between nervous system activation and genuine connection. This learning cannot be undone. Even when old patterns try to resurface, she recognizes them quickly. She feels the urge to chase and knows what it is. She does not judge herself for it. She simply does not obey it. This is freedom. Jung defined freedom not as doing whatever one wants, but as being no longer compelled by unconscious forces. The woman now inhabits this freedom. When he pulls away, she stays. She stays with herself. She stays present. She stays aligned. And because she stays, she no longer loses herself in the process of loving. Love becomes an experience, not a negotiation. A meeting, not a pursuit. And from this place, whatever unfolds next does so on ground that is solid, honest, and deeply respectful of who she has become. As this internal solidity continues to strengthen, the woman begins to notice that her relationship with longing itself has changed. Longing no longer feels like an emergency signal that demands action. It becomes a sensation she can feel without being ruled by it. Jung understood longing as a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, a signal that something meaningful is stirring, but he also warned that when longing is mistaken for direction, people move toward what feels intense rather than what is true. By not chasing, the woman learns to let longing exist without converting it into pursuit. She allows herself to miss someone without reaching for them. This is not repression. It is differentiation. She separates feeling from behavior. This separation is crucial because it restores agency. She can feel deeply without acting compulsively. Many women were never taught this distinction. They learned that feeling required expression, that desire required response, that discomfort required immediate relief. When he pulled away, relief came from contact. Now relief comes from self-regulation. She breathes through the wave. She lets it crest and fall. And each time she does this, the nervous system learns a new truth. I can survive this. I do not disappear when connection pauses. This learning accumulates. It builds confidence that is not based on success in love, but on resilience within self. Jung believed that the psyche matures through repeated encounters with tolerable frustration. Not overwhelming trauma, but manageable tension that is endured consciously. This is exactly what happens here. Each moment she does not chase, she tolerates tension without collapsing. Over time, tension loses its threat. It becomes simply part of relating. This allows her to be more discerning rather than reactive. She notices that some people pull away to regulate themselves, others pull away to avoid intimacy, and some pull away because they are unsure of what they want. She no longer tries to solve these distinctions for them. She lets their behavior speak. She understands now that clarity does not come from conversation alone. It comes from consistency. Words can promise. Behavior reveals. By not chasing, she allows behavior to be seen clearly, without interference. This clarity protects her from investing in potential instead of reality. Potential once felt intoxicating because it allowed hope to survive without evidence. Now hope is grounded. It attaches only where there is reciprocal movement. This does not make her cynical. It makes her accurate. Accuracy feels calm. It does not rush. It does not argue with itself. As she lives this way, she may notice moments of grief resurfacing unexpectedly. A memory, a scent, a song. These moments no longer derail her. She lets the grief pass through without turning it into a story about what she lost or failed to secure. Jung believed that emotions complete themselves when they are not resisted or acted out unconsciously. By allowing grief without chasing comfort, she completes cycles that were once left open. Completion brings peace. Not the absence of sadness, but the absence of obsession. She no longer wonders what could have been. She wonders what is right for her now. This orientation toward the present changes how she relates to new connections as well. She does not rush intimacy. She does not over-explain herself. She watches how someone responds to boundaries, to space, to honesty. She pays attention to how she feels in her body around them. Relaxed or tense. Open or guarded. Jung would say the body is the most honest analyst. She trusts it now. When someone pulls away early on, she does not chase or interpret it as a challenge. She takes it as information. She adjusts her investment accordingly. This prevents deep attachment to unavailable people from forming in the first place. And when attachment does form, it forms on steadier ground. She no longer bonds through anxiety or longing. She bonds through presence and mutuality. This creates relationships that feel less dramatic but more nourishing. Less intoxicating but more sustaining. Over time, she realizes that the drama she once mistook for passion was often the nervous system seeking resolution, not the heart seeking connection. Jung believed that individuation leads away from drama toward depth. Depth is quieter. It does not demand constant reassurance. It does not require pursuit to survive. By not chasing when he pulls away, the woman aligns herself with depth. She chooses substance over stimulation. This choice reshapes her emotional life. She becomes less preoccupied with being desired and more concerned with being respected. Less focused on holding someone's attention and more focused on how she feels in their presence. This shift is irreversible. Once experienced, she cannot unknow it. And because of this, her future is no longer organized around chasing love. It is organized around meeting it where it stands, and walking away when it cannot meet her back. As this way of relating settles into her life, the woman begins to sense something even deeper changing beneath the surface. Her relationship with herself is no longer conditional. In the past, self-worth subtly rose and fell with someone else's availability. Attention meant reassurance. Distance meant doubt. Now, worth is no longer negotiated in the space between messages or measured by someone else's effort. Jung spoke often about the danger of projecting the self onto another, of handing over the task of inner validation to an external figure. When that figure pulls away, the psyche panics, not because love is gone, but because identity feels threatened. By not chasing, the woman reclaims her identity from the projection. She takes back the parts of herself she once outsourced: value, desirability, significance. This reclamation is quiet. There is no dramatic declaration. It simply shows up as a steadiness she has never known before. She notices that her days feel fuller even without romantic stimulation. Her thoughts are less preoccupied. Her energy returns to her body, her work, her creativity, her friendships. Jung believed that libido, psychic energy, flows where attention goes. When attention is no longer trapped in waiting, analyzing, hoping, or fearing, that energy becomes available for life. This is one of the hidden gifts of not chasing. Life expands. She begins to feel more alive, not because she has secured love, but because she is no longer shrinking herself around the possibility of losing it. When he pulls away now, the question that arises is no longer what did I do wrong or how do I fix this? The question becomes how do I feel about this and does this align with the life I am building? This is a radical shift. It places her at the center of her own experience. Jung would say the ego has aligned with the self, the deeper organizing principle of the psyche. From this alignment, decisions feel clearer. Not easier, but clearer. She may still feel sadness, disappointment, or longing. But these emotions no longer hijack her behavior. They inform her without controlling her. She can say no to dynamics that once felt irresistible. She can tolerate endings without chasing closure from someone who cannot provide it. She understands now that closure is an internal act. It comes from seeing clearly, not from being explained to. This understanding allows her to let go without bitterness. There is no need to villainize or idealize. She can hold complexity. He may not be a bad person. He may simply be unavailable. And she no longer makes herself smaller to fit into that reality. As this maturity deepens, she notices something else. When someone is capable of meeting her, they do not need to be chased. Interest is expressed. Effort is visible. Communication flows. This does not feel overwhelming or intense at first. It feels simple. And simplicity no longer bores her. It soothes her. Jung believed that what the psyche truly seeks is not excitement, but integration. Integrated love feels calm. It does not keep the nervous system in suspense. It does not require strategy. By not chasing, the woman becomes available for this kind of love. Not because she learned a technique, but because she changed internally. And this is the part most people miss. The universe, relationships, and patterns do not respond to what we want. They respond to what we are organized around. When she was organized around fear of loss, she attracted situations that activated that fear. Now she is organized around self-respect, presence, and emotional truth. And life responds accordingly. People who cannot meet her fall away more quickly. People who can remain. This is not punishment or reward. It is resonance. Jung understood this as synchronicity, the meaningful alignment between inner state and outer events. By not chasing when he pulls away, she interrupts an old loop and allows a new pattern to emerge. Over time, she realizes that the real transformation was never about him. It was about her capacity to stay with herself through uncertainty. This capacity becomes her anchor. No matter who comes or goes, she remains. And from this place, love is no longer something she runs after. It is something she allows to approach her, at its own pace, on ground that is solid, mutual, and real. And this is where the cycle completes. Not with a dramatic reunion, not with a message finally arriving, and not with proof that someone chose her after all. It completes with something far more lasting. She chooses herself without needing to abandon connection. She no longer waits in emotional suspense, no longer places her nervous system on hold for someone else's readiness. Jung believed that the moment a person withdraws projection, life reorganizes around them. This is not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because the psyche is no longer leaking its power outward. When she stops chasing, she steps into her own center. From that center, she can meet love without losing herself, and she can let go without losing her dignity. This is not indifference. It is emotional sovereignty. She feels deeply, but she is no longer ruled by fear of abandonment. She trusts her capacity to remain whole even when someone cannot stay. And this trust changes everything. It changes who she is drawn to, how long she tolerates ambiguity, and what she accepts as love. What once felt unbearable now feels navigable. What once felt personal now feels informative. She understands that when someone pulls away, it reveals something about their capacity, not her worth. This understanding settles into her body, not as a belief, but as lived experience. And from this place, she no longer needs to chase love, because she is no longer running from herself. If this perspective resonated with you, if you felt seen in these words, and if you want to continue exploring relationships, attachment, and emotional healing through a deeper psychological lens, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Stay with us. There is much more to uncover.